Welcome back. This is Lou Gray again. I just wanted to do a quick mini lesson in follow up to my last lesson to talk about how the math, manipulating the numbers, went in that last lesson. I said I could talk about it in another lesson, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we talked about the area of a rectangle, which is length times width, and an area of a triangle, which is 1/2 base times height. And I wrote down this crazy confusing thing. I wrote it down this way with the square brackets and the parentheses and all kinds of stuff. Before I get into that, I want to get into something really quick. Multiplying by a fraction. Without doing a complete lesson on fractions, I'm just going to do a quick little lesson on multiplying by a fraction. So if I have 1/2 and I'm multiplying that by 8. In order to do that, I would have to make them both fractions. So I would say 1/2 times 8/1, which is 8 as a fraction. And then you multiply straight across. So 1 times 8 equals 8. 2 times 1 equals 2. So that's 8 seconds, which actually means this little dividing line here in a fraction is actually a dividing line. It's division. It's 8 divided by 2. And 8 divided by 2 equals 4. And if you do that backwards, one little thing you don't always think about, if you do this backwards, if you change that equal to a multiplication sign and that division sign to an equal sign, 4 times 2 equals 8. Right? 8 divided by 2 equals 4. 4 times 2 equals 8. I don't know if that helps you at all. But that is how you multiply fractions. So it can be a little bit daunting to multiply things by fractions. But that's also why multiplying by a fraction is the same thing as dividing by the bottom number. As long as the top number is 1, it's the same thing as dividing by the bottom number. So if I have 1/2 times 8, it is equal to 8 divided by 2. Does that make sense? I hope so, because I can't hear you answer me. Because I'm sitting in my garage with my dogs and my baby chickens. All right, so moving on. This can be written as 1/2 base times height. I don't need all that fancy stuff because the b and the h are variables. All variables are. It's a fancy math word for something that stands for something else. If I were to ask you to wait in line for me while I went to the bathroom, and then I came back and I got in line there, and then you got out of line and went and did whatever you were doing, you held that place for me. You were acting like me, but you weren't me, right? It's kind of weird, but that's how variables work. In this case, with our 1/2, big craziness, 8 times 4, the b and the h are variables that stand for 8 and 4. So we just substitute those variables with the things that they stand for. Does that make sense? So the base in this case was 8 and the height was 4. We don't need all these fancy doo-ha's when we write it this way because we know the b and the h are variables. And if they're next to each other, that just means multiplication. The 1/2 is next to the b, that just means multiplication. Any time in math where you see a number next to a variable or two variables next to each other, that always, always, always means multiplication. Multiplication is one of the most confusing things because there's so many ways to write it. You can write 8 times 4. You can write 8 times 4. Or you can write 8 times 4. You could write 8 times 4, and technically it would be kind of correct, but it's really confusing because that looks like 84. And that's why we have the parentheses, so that you can see that's two separate numbers next to each other. That's all that parentheses means in the multiplication, is you're showing this is an 8 and this is a 4, and it's multiplication. I don't need the parentheses because this is clearly a B and this is clearly an H. We don't have a letter that looks like this. I hope that clears that up. I don't know if it did or not, but I hope that clears that up. So all of this is just a fancy way to separate things. And I use square brackets and regular parentheses, and you could also use, and I'm horrible at writing them, these kind of things like this. And there's parentheses and there's square brackets. They're all just different ways of separating things so you can see that they're being multiplied by each other. And you always start with the inside. So the inside one here is 8 and 4s inside these big brackets. But I could have, now let me do some erasing because my little whiteboard is all full. If I had a third variable and I had, if I was doing 1/2 x times y times z, then I could write that if x was, let's go over here, x equals 8, y equals 4, z equals 2. So if I wanted to write that, I could write 1/2, and then I could do one of these goofy brackets, and I could do 8, and then a square bracket, 4 times 2, and then another one of these goofy brackets. Okay, and that all it means is we're starting in the middle. We're starting in the middle, and these are all just ways to group things together. So these are all grouped together. So here, the two closest ones are a 4 and a 2. So that's going to be 8. And then the next closest ones are going to be this 8 and this 8. So 8 times 8 is 16. No, it's not. That's 8 plus 8. See, look at that. 8 times 8 is 64. That is horrible. I need to get a new tablet. This one's old and beat up. 8 times 8 is 64. Now the next closest thing is that 1/2. Now we know that if you multiply by half, it's the same thing as dividing by 2. So 64 divided by 2. 2 times 3 is 6. And 2 times 2 is 4, so that would be 32 for that answer. And all it is, like I said, all it is anytime you have any of these brackets, all it's doing is separating the things so you know they need to be multiplied. That's all those bracket means. But then, if it's all kinds of brackets stacked on top of each other, it's just showing start from the inside and work your way out. So that's why I wrote it like this, because I was trying to separate everything so you could clearly see. Start on the inside, 8 times 4 and times 1/2. But you don't need to do that. If it's just multiplication in there, there's no need to do that. And I will show you. Beep-a-dee beep beep beep-a-doo boo bop-a-dee beep bop bop bop. Erasing. Go back to that. So in this case we had 1/2. I'm going to put an 8 here. I don't need to use a parentheses because there's no such number that looks like this. We clearly know that's a 1/2 and an 8. And if they're next to each other, that means multiplication. I'm going to put some parentheses here because it's that could be confused as 84. I'm going to put the parentheses to show that we multiply 8 times 4. Now if we go left to right, 1/2 times 8 is the same thing as 8 divided by 2, which is 4. And then 4 times 4, bring that 4 down, equals 16. But if I go the other way, I have 1/2 times 8 times 4. Let's say I didn't like left to right. I wanted to go right to left. 8 times 4 is 32. Bring that 1/2 down. 1/2 of 32, 16. With multiplication, specifically with multiplication and addition, it does not matter what order you go in at all. Now, if I were to throw a division in there, that would matter, because 2 times 4 is 8. 4 erasing. Do. Okay. 2 times 4 is 8. 4 times 2 is 8. But 4 divided by 2, which can also be written as 4 divided by 2, equals 2. But 2 divided by 4, which can also be written as 2 divided by 4, is equal to 0.5, which is 1/2. So, not reversible. Multiplication, reversible. No problem. Division, not reversible. Not at all. Alright, I said I was going to talk about why I did this goofy stuff, and I did talk about that. Wow, that didn't come out so well. This goofy stuff. And I did talk about that. I hope you understood, and I hope this helped. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.